let's get straight into talking about professional wrestling. And we're going to be talking about our main topic at the top of this show. And that is, of course, TNA. TNA. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. I have a TNA poster on my background right here. This poster right here is a poster of TNA Destination X 2006. The date is right there if you can see it. Sunday, March 12th, 2006. And I believe the main event of that show was Christian Cage defending the NWA World title against Monty Brown. And I say the NWA title because at the time in TNA's early years, they used the NWA title. But that show also had the debut of Scott Steiner. And this was kind of months into when TNA started off on Spike. And for lack of a better term, TNA had a lot going for itself in 2006. I mean, they had a lot going for themselves in 2006. A lot of people say 2006 to 2008 was kind of the peak years of TNA. And some people add 2009, but in my opinion, 2009 was really where the crack started to show. And that was the year before Hogan and Bischoff came in. I also have a poster in my studio of TNA Turning Point 2005, which was a couple of pay-per-views before Destination X 2006. Now, why do I have posters of those particular shows? Well, I have really no real reason as to why I have posters of those actual shows. Long story short, I wanted to get a poster for, let's say, Lockdown 2008, because I love that poster, of course. That show had Kurt Angle versus Samoa Joe in the Six Sides of Steel, and a lot of people consider that match to be one of the best TNA main events of all time. It was kind of an MMA style match, but it fit for the times because at the time MMA was just going through a boom period during that period of time. But I wanted to get some sort of TNA posters on there, but I got Turning Point 2005 simply because of Abyss versus Sabu, which had the Barbed Wire Massacre match. Rest in peace, Sabu. Arguably one of the greatest TNA matches of all time. And I got Destination X 2006 because it has AJ Styles. You can't see him right here. Christopher Daniels. And you can't really see the majority of him, but Samoa Joe. The three, in my opinion, one of the three names that reminisce a lot of that makes you think about TNA. Whenever you talk about those three names, you think about TNA. And of course, they had arguably the greatest match in TNA history, that being AJ Styles versus Christopher Daniels versus Samoa Joe in the three-way match for the X Division title at Unbreakable 2005. Arguably the greatest match in TNA history. But TNA, man, again, and I've constantly talked about this time and time again, not only on this show, but in videos that I've done before talking about TNA. TNA was always a company that has gone through a lot of trial and tribulation. They have gone through a lot of trial and tribulation, especially after 2014. You know, they started to go downhill around 2009, 2010, but they really were down on the dumps right after 2014 when they lost Spike TV. Because then they were jumping from network to network. They were going through Destination America, Pop TV. It got so bad that they were on this channel called Pursuit, a network that nobody had. It got so bad that they had to go on Twitch because they couldn't find any other television outlet. It also got so bad to the point where Anthem themselves wanted to sell TNA to AEW. Now, keep in mind, AEW, I believe, hadn't even made an announcement that the company was forming. But if you guys do not recall, a couple months before the announcement was, officially made for AEW as a company, there were a bunch of trademarks saying AEW, All Elite Wrestling. Tony Khan and the Khan family were running this. We're planning on starting this wrestling promotion. It was fun times. And again, this was coming after the first All In, which was September of 2018. A lot of stuff was going on. But Impact Wrestling at the time was kind of down on the dumps. Again, this is a company that has gone through a lot of trial and tribulation. And before Anthem purchased the company, which I believe was in 2017, the former owner, Dixie Carter, had a lot of issues paying talent. They couldn't even afford to put on their biggest show of the year, Bound for Glory. It was It was a crap show. It was embarrassing and just absolutely horrible. Tough times for TNA. But at the same time, TNA has always been a company that has always strived itself on being the underdog and being a company that is prone to survival. That is just not prone. Take that word out. I don't even know why I added that word out, but being a company that has just strived on survival. They've always survived whenever any trial or tribulation that they've dealt with. They've always survived. And imagine if you were to tell somebody in 2015, 2016 that TNA would be a thing in 2025, 26, they probably would laugh in your face. Now, if you were to tell a TNA fan that same thing in 2006, they'd be like, of course, TNA's freaking awesome. And keep in mind, 2006 to 2008 were TNA's peak years. But of course, the dark ages from 2015, 2014 to, let's say, 2020 were kind of the dark ages for TNA. The dark ages. And look, I am by no means a TNA hater. I'm going to say a lot of things negatively about TNA in this podcast. And the number one thing that I want to tell everybody watching this show is that I do not hate TNA. This is what we call constructive criticism, okay? I am going to give constructive criticism on what I saw this past Thursday on AMC, because I watched this show through AMC Plus. And I have a lot of things to say about this show, because this show was a train wreck. Of course, going back a little bit on the history of TNA, of course, had the partnership with AEW, and it kind of didn't really turn out well. I mean, at the time, they were still Impact Wrestling, but Impact had the partnership with AEW, and a lot of people view that partnership looking back negatively because they said AEW didn't really do anything for TNA or Impact Wrestling. I beg to differ because, I mean, for God's sakes, AEW literally gave one of their top guys, Kenny Omega, as he sent him all the way to Impact Wrestling and made him the Impact World Champion. They gave Impact Kenny Omega. They brought in Christian Cage, who was an AEW contracted wrestler, over to Impact. And Christian became the Impact/TNA World Champion. So I don't want to hear anything about, they didn't do anything to benefit TNA, blah, blah, blah. People need to understand that Impact in 2020/2021 was a different company then, during those years, 2020, 2021, compared to now. And then everybody started talking about Impact. Oh my God, you should really watch Impact Wrestling. But how the hell am I going to watch Impact Wrestling if I don't have Access TV? How the hell am I going to watch it? Fast forward, 2023, Bound for Glory 2023. Of course, Will Ospreay had that awesome match with Mike Bailey. They announced that TNA was coming back. And it sparked a lot of conversation. I was excited. I'm a big TNA fan. I was a huge TNA fan. I'm a big TNA fan. It's great to see. Everybody watched Hard to Kill. Not the best show, considering the fact that it was basically an Impact Wrestling show with TNA letters. And if you really think about it, it's kind of a thing now. TNA just nowadays in 2025 just does not resemble anything about the old TNA. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can be a bad thing because from a presentation standpoint, it's completely different. There's no six-sided ring for obvious reasons, because the six-sided ring is, let's be honest with ourselves, it's dangerous for the talent, so it's understandable. And people need to understand as well that TNA, when they started out as a company in 2002, started off with a four-sided ring. And to go even further, it was actually a WCW-style four-sided ring. Another thing. Scott D'Amore gets fired. Everybody was like, oh my God, Scott D'Amore got fired. What the hell is going to happen to TNA? There was no stopping TNA. Then they had the partnership with WWE. And let's be honest with ourselves, the partnership with WWE has benefited TNA greatly. It has. And I'm not going to dispute that. Because if you dispute that, you're obviously in denial. You are obviously in denial. That partnership with WWE has benefited TNA more than any other partnership that TNA has had in their 20 plus year history. It has. And then as TNA started to gain more and more and more momentum, of course, they sold 4,000 plus seats at Slammiversary 2 years ago. And everybody thought Joe Hendry was going to win the title. He didn't win the title. And then we waited until Bound for Glory. He didn't win the title. Joe Hendry essentially became a phenomenon across the internet. He became a phenomenon on social media. He has become a phenomenon. And then, of course, he finally wins the title at Genesis, has a lackluster run. And the new guy that is chasing after the world title is Santana. Santana is the guy, man. Santana, of course, the story of Santana is fantastic. This is a guy that has, let's be honest with ourselves, this is the guy that has betted on himself. He is the definition of betting on yourself. He left AEW, which is a much larger promotion, to go to a promotion like TNA, which by default now, especially now, is the number 3 promotion in the United States, to make a name for himself because he wanted more from his career. And he knew that there was a ceiling for him in AEW. And ceilings in AEW is something that I am going to be talking about on this show, especially when we get to talk about Powerhouse Hobbs, because there's been a lot of discourse about Powerhouse Hobbs as of late. And I'm going to tell you why on this very show as to why Powerhouse Hobbs made the right decision in leaving AEW. But we're not talking about Powerhouse Hobbs now. We're talking about Santana. Santana bets on himself, goes to TNA, and they are doing this long buildup, a very similar buildup that they did with Joe Hendry in going after the TNA World title. Last year, TNA sells roughly around 8,000 seats at the UBS Arena. Now, granted, the UBS Arena holds more than 10,000 seats, but for TNA standards, 8,000 seats is fantastic for them. But at the same time, they sold a couple 1,000 seats a couple of days before the show because they announced that AJ Styles was returning to TNA. After how many years? What was it? 10 years? 11 years? So they announced that AJ Styles is coming back and they sold a bunch of tickets. AJ Styles essentially helped TNA sell those last couple of tickets for Slammiversary to reach that record. God forbid they gave you the turnstile count. But in terms of TNA, it took them 20 plus years to sell 8,000 seats. It took TNA 20 plus years to sell 8,000 seats at the UBS Arena. You know how long it took AEW to sell 10,000 seats for their first show? It took them 4 minutes. Now it's because the product was in demand. Nowadays, they can't even sell, let's be honest, like maybe, to an estimate, maybe 4,000 seats to a normal Dynamite. And that's strictly only for weekly television. For their pay-per-views, they're able to sell a bunch of tickets. Revolution is actually doing really good at the Crypto.com arena. I still call that arena the Staples Center, but whatever. But in terms of TNA, they did not put the belt on Santana. They didn't put the belt on Santana in his home state of New York, which made absolutely no sense. They moved towards Bound for Glory. A couple months later, we were at Bound for Glory. And where was it? Lowell, Massachusetts, I believe that was the arena. A pretty good show. We had the Hardys versus the Dudleys, a last time ever match, which was fantastic. We got Leon Slater versus Javon Evans, which was by far, it could have been the match of the year, and the match was absolutely amazing until Deep State came into the picture and basically ruined the whole thing. That is a classic TNA finish right there. TNA is known to do false finishes like that. Not false finishes, but TNA is known to do crappy finishes like that. They are known. From their 20-plus year history, they're known to do crappy finishes in their matches. And then we had Santana finally win the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. And then they are not on television for a couple weeks, almost a whole month. And then their first night back, they have Santana lose the TNA World Heavyweight Championship to Kazarian via a roll-up. A roll-up. Think about that. A roll-up. A roll-up. And then they wanted Santana to chase back into the world title scene. That is basically TNA in a nutshell.